All right, I'll just put that there. Okay, one of the big things that interested me when I found out about you and what you work in is what interested you to begin with in happiness specifically as a field of research.
So there were two quite different routes that I got there, and one was very much subconscious and was in the back of my head, lingering for a long, long time. That went back to early days when I was a new anthropology graduate and went to volunteer for several years in India.
Okay.
And that led to my PhD research with forest people, very old-fashioned anthropology research, living with people who objectively were ultra poor, with objectively some pretty awful living conditions, high infant mortality, very high rates of TB, and were mistreated. They were sort of, in the terms of the pecking order, the social pecking order, the lowest of the low. And yet, for me, living with them was great, you know, and they all seemed pretty cheery to me.
Right.
They had a good time when they had festivals and stuff. And so, for many years after that, I had this sort of fairly classic anthropological thought running around inside my head was, you know, how come people living in objective poverty can appear to be quite happy to an outsider, and do they have a different route to happiness, or is there stuff about happiness that we should learn from them? And yet, I worked in poverty reduction, and so also I didn't want to romanticize, and so the second route was through my professional route, which combined academic scholarship with social planning for poverty reduction in India, but also in many other countries, which was basically part of the grand global project of modernizing the world so that people can live longer and better. And in that line of work, it seemed that International Development Cooperation was very much focused on removal of harms. So removing poverty, removing suffering, fighting human rights abuse and all those things. So I was drawn into that system, but I felt it was very restrictive. And when I got to the level that I had sufficient years of experience that people at national and global level were asking my advice, where should we be going with this thing called development? I would start suggesting to people that we really need to think a bit more optimistically than just removing poverty. Removing poverty is great, and some people think that most extreme forms of poverty are pretty much gone within my lifetime, which is quite astonishing. It was unimaginable a couple of generations ago. But I still think we should think more optimistically, because removing poverty gets you up to a particular okay level.
I watched your TED talk where you use a graph that shows an increase in income but a plateau of happiness.
Yes,
if I remember correctly.
So that's the other thing. I was also trying to. So the economists that I work with are always saying, well, so growth is your main route to living well and living longer, and I don't really dispute that. But except insofar as you do need to ask the question, what's the growth actually for at sort of individual and collective levels? And ultimately, you don't just want more goods and more money. You want to live better, and collectively, you want your societies to be flourishing societies, really good societies, not just societies that have got their act together to keep the lid on poverty, but societies that are really, wonderful to live in, full of creativity, that foster the arts, for example. And give proper support to people to paint pictures and make pots and make music. That everybody has opportunities to do those, and that they share their creativity and so on. That's what I call a flourishing society. And so the removal of poverty helps give people a chance there, but it doesn't it's not in itself good enough. And likewise, exactly the same with economic growth. Yeah, of course there's going to be diminishing returns eventually, and it's not all, for most poorer countries in the world, growth is your best route to happiness, because you've got to remove poverty. You can't have a happy nation if a huge percentage are living in desperate conditions. But you also need to think maybe at some point you've got enough growth, you've got,
and then what next?
Your good governance and your human rights. What's going to happen? How are you going to ensure that people carry on being nice to each other, supporting each other,
right,
and pursuing excellence, but also having fun? Fun is quite a good thing to aim for.
Right. So how do you then go about researching that? And I'm assuming there's an aspect of your research that looks for solutions as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I try, but obviously a responsible academic advises people to look for manageable questions that they can provide some answer to, and I haven't yet found my big manageable question for happiness research. I've just sort of redesigned myself as a happiness researcher, and it's worked well to the extent that I've interacted in constructive ways with lots of different disciplines, but and also with outside agencies, people who work on things like kindness and befriending and social quality, and with governments like the government of Bhutan I worked with briefly.
I heard about that.
So all of that's good, but as an academic, if I were to do a project on happiness, I need something a bit more specific. And when I do a writing project, or whether it's a research project, I look at something much more specific. So recently I collaborated with people actually from the art and architecture parts of the university on mobility and well-being. So basically how moving around the built environment influences our well-being. So quite a practical approach to it.
Like feng
probably
shui,
more well-being than happiness. Well, yes, that sort of stuff is relevant.
Right.
I mean, we were looking at very, very down-to-earth stuff to do with, mostly, and to do with walking in urban built but also green environments, and looking at the available research on correlations between certain kinds of environments and well-being, and trying to work out where mobility fits in, because the reasonable hunch is people don't just live longer and better near parks just because of the mere existence of the park. It's doing stuff, it's appreciating the park in some active way.
Okay.
So we looked at what it does for the emotions, basically going for a walk in the park.
Right, okay.
What does it do? Does it relax the mind, or are there some interesting things in the park that also spike your interest and help the brain to work on constructive things?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Right, I see.
And we monitored using EEG headsets. We monitored people's brainwaves as they walked in different environments to have a look at how the brain responds.
Okay, yeah.
So that's an example of a very
like a solution,
reasonably solution-based
interesting
work.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But other stuff, I'm just working with philosophers and talking about the good life and why people seem to think that they know where happiness lies, but they don't actually pursue it. So a lot of my time is spent just I think having conversations about happiness is intrinsically good. Yeah, it's a good thing to do. Right.
Why do you think that is? That a lot of people, like, a lot of this stuff is common knowledge of what you should do to be happier. For example, exercise, but a lot of people know but don't do, if you know what I mean. Why do you think that is?
Well, part of it is people are their own worst enemies, and they like people. I think most of us have some kind of self-destructive urges, but also I think it's also at a social level. If you look above the personal psychological level, it's how our societies are organised. So if our cities were organised so that all environments were easily walkable and it was just normal for everybody to walk to work and school and so on, people would, and they would get plenty of exercise.
Right.
But once you get a critical mass who think that it's normal to drive to school, then it makes it harder for the walkers and the cyclists.
Right, okay.
And then if you're... Edinburgh is, pretty much a world-class environment. We're full of parks. Cities go, it's terrific. But we still have a terrible traffic problem, so there's ways in which we could still improve.
Right, okay, that makes sense to me.
We could have the city more or less entirely pedestrianised if we wanted.
Right.
And keep traffic to the absolute bare minimum.
Strasbourg in France is sort of like that as a city.
Is it?
I don't know if you've been.
No, I haven't been recently. I haven't been for 30-something years.
Yeah. I often think of Strasbourg because I'm from there originally in France, and it's sort of like the Edinburgh of France, but the whole centre is off limits to most traffic, so it's a lot more pedestrian.
Yeah, I do remember even then, because we didn't really have pedestrian zones until the late 70s, and so I remember noticing in the 70s when I was there, Strasbourg and Munich as well, and various other European cities I visited seemed a lot better organised in that respect.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's just an example. There is then a question about if people have that knowledge and academics research isn't producing radically new knowledge about happiness, there's a question. I think it does raise interesting questions about what academic research is for, and which is why I keep coming back to this concept of the happiness lens. So my mission in life isn't necessarily to dig out radically new empirical knowledge on happiness. I think there are people who do that quite well. You know, people who do studies of, quantitative studies of how much people's mood lifts and for how long when they make a particular kind of purchase or when they do an altruistic act. So I synthesize that knowledge. But in my happiness courses, I think of myself not so much as a didactic dropper of knowledge bombs about happiness, because people know, first of all, everyone's route to happiness is going to be different.
Right, okay, for sure.
And people probably know pretty well what makes them feel happy and what makes their friends feel happy. But they don't necessarily talk and think about that as much as they might do. So I think of myself as someone that facilitates conversations about happiness, which are intrinsically good to have, but also, who knows, they might lead to better actions. So, little autobiographical version of that would be the very first instance of that happiness course. I was sort of trying to, at the early stages of reinventing myself as a scholar, and I spent far too much time. I had small children, but I still spent far too much time running around the world doing consultancy. It was appallingly overworked.
Really?
And I, at the end of the course, we had a big session. Although this wasn't a practical course, what could you do to change your life as a result of what you learned in this course? And we went round the room, and then it was my turn. And I said, well, pretty simple thing, but I used to really, really love getting out and running, and I haven't done that for 10 years, which is bonkers. And live in this beautiful city. So starting today, I'm going to go out and run around Arthur's Seat most days. And that was 15 years ago. I've not looked back. I'm totally born again about running. I can't imagine it not being a major part of my life.
I've heard this as well about you, running,
So, and then later I sort of added in music, was another thing I used to love and didn't make the time for. So, a lot of it is about personal choices that perhaps we need to nudge one another towards.
Through conversation, like you said. Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. Well, so, like you said, everyone's route to happiness will be different. But from this time that you've spent now, researching and having these conversations with people about happiness and hearing maybe people's different routes to happiness or different ideas of how to attain a certain level of happiness, what is something that stands out to you as a particularly valuable answer, if I can use that word, to your happiness specifically?
Okay, so this is a very big and very vague one. Okay. But obviously, as anthropologists, if I teach happiness, I'm duty bound to look at it cross-culturally and to consider whether there are big cultural differences. And one very important area of debate, I'm not saying it's in any simplistic way a big area of difference, but one area of debate about cultural differences is the question of whether Western culture has overly psychologized the self. In other words, treated the self as an individual unit. So we're thinking of the self. And I think there's some truth in, at least in terms of the way that we talk about happiness is about, I'm responsible for pursuing my happiness, you're responsible for pursuing yours. In cultural contexts where people think and talk in terms of an interdependent self or in terms of a more communal well-being, or what I call social well-being. Then people are the question is not so much, are you happy and can you make yourself happier? But rather, is your social world a happier one, and can you, together with other people, collaborate to produce more social happiness? In other words, the location of happiness is correctly placed, not just within the individual mind, which is, it's our receiver, if you like, but the venue, the space in which it happens is, it happens between people. And I think in some other cultural traditions, non-Western, that is more explicitly and better recognized.
Did you witness that in Bhutan?
So I wouldn't say spectacularly so. I mean, there's a very strong element of Buddhism which is about detachment for the self, which I think is very helpful. There, there's the official Buddhist doctrine of no self, which is which I think is a very for Western people it presents a very, very interesting and helpful thought experiment.
Absolutely.
Can you try for once in your life to imagine that this thing that you believe in so fervently may just be an evanescent thing that can vanish into thin air? Personally, I find that tremendously psychologically. It's basically just good psychology.
Right. Okay.
Nothing very fancy about that concept. It's just good psychology. Whereas you compare that with the obsessive doctrine of the true self, finding your true self, in Western psychological tradition, the idea that you can only have a meaningful life if you found the real internal self. That seems to be a mistakenly internalist quest.
Right.
So there's that, and there's also the other thing. I suppose in looking at South India, my field research with forest people there, objectively miserable existence in lots of ways, lots of ill health, but and no TV, no film. Only the very richest people in the village would go once every 6 months or so to the cinema. So no laid-on entertainments. A minimal education, a day-to-day existence. But the one thing they did really, really well was get together and have festivity. And at those festivities, people who had mental problems or health problems or quarrels with their family would have a truly wonderful opportunity to not just detach from their problems, but to rethink their problems in constructive ways. And the centerpiece of the festivity was shamanic experiences, where people would go into trance and then become different people, speak in different voices, and then the people around them would talk to them. And often this was very much like a kind of collective psychotherapy clinic.
Wow.
You could see sort of what was happening, but only the people themselves knew exactly what was going on.
Wow.
People were talking about difficulties and problems, but often in very funny and kind of cathartic, entertaining ways. And often very dramatic ways. Sometimes trance would be very dramatic. But above all, come back to the initial thing, life is there to have fun. Their festivity was pure fun. It did them good, but it was intrinsically good because it was just a great form of entertainment.
I see.
And it cost nothing, and it used and it gave people a chance to use extraordinary skill, linguistic skill particularly. Because when you're arguing with somebody who's in trance, you've got to use every rhetorical device you can come up with to keep the conversation coherent and keep it going.
Wow.
So that was that's where I think my recent happiness research has enabled me to go back and link up with my PhD research from the early 80s in quite interesting ways.
That's fascinating. That's a very interesting answer. I did want to ask you, what is it that makes you happy? So you mentioned running. Is there a primary thing? Like, is there a reason you get up in the morning? Something that just fires you up and.
So I think what keeps me happy is not so much the pursuit of happiness, as the pursuit of interest. So I suppose that being an academic, I have cultivated an inquiring mind, and so what makes me want to rush out of bed in the morning would be if I've got something I know that I really want to learn more about that day. Even if I've got a lecture that I have to give and prepare, something that's a bit worrying, but it's also exciting.
To learn.
You don't know what you're going to say. By 5 o'clock, you have to decide what to say. And that can actually. So I don't think it's the pursuit of. So for me, it's maybe I have a Scottish Calvinist kind of upbringing. It's not the pursuit of rewards and the pursuit of pleasure. The pleasure is in the pursuit of something interesting.
Yeah.
And I suppose running. So running is a very different kind of pursuit.
For sure.
Why do I do it? Well, if I'm having a relaxing run, it is just pure pleasure. So I actually alternate. I mean, I'm coming on for 60, so I'm not able to train really hard the way I used to, but I do still train for races. So I do sometimes go out with the purpose of making my body hurt, so that my body will get faster. But most days I'm going out on a run is for pleasure. So it's quite interesting. You can observe yourself and the different purposes you can do for the same activity.
For sure. Yeah.
So like today it was quite a good day. I went out before lunch and really blasted it out in Holyrood Park.
Good.
Absolutely killing it. But I feel great now.
Yeah. You feel good for the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And other days I go out and run, coast it for 10 miles, and it's just pure fun, enjoy the scenery, let my brain chill out, and you come back with a different kind of feeling.
Yeah. Okay, I get you. I can relate to the first part of your answer regarding the pursuit of interest. Right. I have one last question, which is my favorite question. Which is not necessarily specifically with regards to your expertise in happiness or even necessarily research or academics, but just life in general. Is there, over the past 2 to 5 years, a life lesson that stands out to you, that you've learned, that you find of particular value, from dating from within the past 5 years? Something you've learned or something you've realized? Or
it's a very good question. It's a putting you in the spot kind of question.
It is. It's a tough one.
Because I can think of incremental things, but dramatic things.
It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can even be an insight. It can be maybe sometimes we appreciate something that we never used to appreciate, for example.
So actually, that's a weird. I don't know whether that was telepathy, but what I was working towards was the idea that. I think it's always been with me, but I have allowed it to work on me a bit more in actually, particularly in the past year, on the subject of appreciation. I'm always telling people. If you want insights and happiness, appreciation is where you can appreciate anything, and basically you get double the value or treble the value from something by appreciating it. So if you have a nice drink with a couple of friends, and you can appreciate afterwards by thinking through all the fun stuff that you said. But appreciating the small things in life, I think, is something that people get better at as they get older. And so, for example, I tend to rush through life a bit too much, like most of us, perhaps.
I think so.
But something that I've done much better in the past couple of years is appreciating flowers.
Flowers.
It's a totally simple thing, and I don't know much about flowers. I'm not much of a gardener. I don't have the patience for it.
Right.
But just through photography and wandering with the dog, I've started to appreciate flowers, and through that appreciate the seasons more.
Wow.
But even to appreciate particularly the tiniest, little, most insignificant flowers and look at them closely, and actually technology can help. So if you take a picture of a tiny flower, you can boost it up and you see stuff that wasn't there when you just walked past it.
Right.
Again, it's a version of interest, I suppose, but it's cultivating appreciation in the really simple things in life. And when you do notice stuff like that, the rhythm of the seasons and the rhythm of the seasons becomes a different kind of pleasure, because you notice that here's the first snowdrops just beginning to poke out,
right?
And then you know what's coming next month, and you start anticipating as you get anticipatory pleasure. I mean, you can't beat small pleasures like that.
I agree.
and just appreciating them mentally, but also allowing the time to appreciate them. Having a dog has changed that for me.
Yeah.
My kids bullied me into getting a dog. They said, we haven't got time to be responsible dog owners. And again, I can't imagine my life without my dog.
Yeah.
Totally passionate about my dog.
Oh, dogs are wonderful. Yeah.
And it changes. The dog changes your life. You have to adapt to the dog, but in a good way.
Right. I think the flowers are a beautiful metaphor for life in general and appreciation as well, because they come and go. There are so many different kinds, and yeah, it's like you have to appreciate it while it's there. And what you were saying as well about zooming it up in a photo, for example, and really looking at the detail, and just the fact that such a thing exists. To me, it's like one of the big things for me at the moment is just acknowledging the fact that we exist, that we've come to exist out of nothing, essentially. And the flowers
the flowers are fantastic. So this one I'd never heard of it before. It's just a version of oxalis, which is
wow.
It's a what do you call it? A kind of clover. Isn't
I don't think I've ever seen that before.
It's got all flowers in it just now, but even when it's not got its flowers, it has these absolutely stunning leaves. Yeah. And so I grew one from seed, and they've now been fruitful and multiplied. So I grow little babies and. So little things like that are, and then you notice not just the seasons. I mean, some flowers come and go during the day. They open and shut during the day, and if you don't appreciate that, you'd never know. You'd never be any the wiser.
Totally.
Some people don't notice. There's all kinds of things that shock me that some people don't. People don't notice the moon sometimes.
It's just so easy to take things for granted. Because we just see these things every day, so we forget to look at them. Yes. Like we forget to look at ourselves.
But looking and noticing stuff is that would be my one big thing. Well, I suppose I have two big things, because getting outside, self-transcendence. They're both about self-transcendence.
Yeah.
Self-transcendence. Making not your happiness your goal, but social happiness. That seems to me to be quite a fundamentally crucial thing for everybody to think about.
Social happiness.
If you can do something to make the world a happier place, it's going to bounce back on you, but that needn't be your motivation. It's just intrinsically good to help other people, even in a small way.
Yeah, totally.
Small acts of kindness are good.
I used to be very religious, and I lost my religion, and something that struck me since having lost my religion is that my faith in humanity improved, because I realized that it's in everyone's own best interest to be good, because it makes other people around them more likely to be good back to them. So that's just the social happiness thing that rings a bell with me. Is like it's so beautiful to me, because it's so simple.
I suppose I probably had a very small phase of being a tiny bit religious in school, but witnessing an utterly different form of religion in the form of the forest people that I lived with, and seeing religion as something effervescent and fun, full of skepticism and jokes and enjoyment.
Right.
Opened my eyes to a different way of doing religion, and there's loads of good stuff in Christian traditions too, but something went wrong with the way in which it became institutionalized in Western Europe and became a sort of tool for authority and a bit lugubrious.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, Neil, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks for calling in. I'm just trying to. I don't know if you're going to write a book or write a novel,
who knows?
Or do a video, what's going to come of it. There is this chap. Is this the one I'm thinking of?